When you're ready.
Okay. I chose to. Can I restart? Okay, I chose to research how do age and previous relationship experience affect one's awareness of domestic violence. What is domestic violence? The standard definition of domestic violence is the violent or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse or partner. But according to the United States Department of Justice, domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. Domestic violence can be physical, sexual, emotional, economical, psychological, or technological actions or other patterns of coercive behavior that influence another person within an intimate partner relationship. This includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame, hurt, injure, or wound someone. Examples of abusive behavior include physical abuse, sexual abuse, economical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, or technological abuse. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. This includes a range of behaviors from slapping, pushing, shoving, or others. On a typical day, there are more than 20,000 calls placed to domestic violence hotlines nationwide. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are abused by an intimate partner, and during 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. When I initially started the research project, I was very interested in working within the realm of true crime because I've always been interested in various true crime podcasts, documentaries, and books. Crime Junkie, Dateline, and other various true crime documentaries have consumed much of my time. An overarching theme throughout true crime is the very apparent presence of domestic violence. All too often, domestic violence turns into domestic homicide, making its way onto the stage of true crime. I thought it'd be interesting to see if certain factors could contribute to someone's level of awareness of behaviors of domestic homicide. As I was researching factors that might affect awareness, there seemed to be significant amounts of research done by associations such as the National Library of Medicine and YouGov America that concluded that exposure to domestic violence, whether it be through media consumption or experience, can raise one's awareness of behaviors of domestic violence. I couldn't find any studies on whether or not any other factors increased awareness, so that's when I decided to focus on age and previous relationship experience as my 2 factors. Why is this important? It is important to determine someone's awareness level because ultimately it can save their lives. We should be able to educate people with low levels of awareness in order to keep them safe. By understanding the dangers of domestic violence, we are able to quickly identify inappropriate behaviors and put a stop to them there and then. This is also important because domestic violence has physical impacts, mental impacts, and economical impacts. One physical impact is that women who are abused by intimate partners are more vulnerable to contracting HIV and other STIs due to forced intercourse or prolonged exposure to stress. 2 mental impacts are domestic victimization is correlated with higher rates of depression and suicidal behaviors. 1 in 15 children are exposed to domestic violence, and about 90% of these children are eyewitnesses to the violence. 2 economical impacts are victims of intimate partner violence lose about 8 million paid workdays per year, and between 21 and 60% of victims of intimate partner violence will lose their jobs for reasons stemming from the abuse. Once again, I could not find any research to support that age and previous relationship experience played a role in one's awareness of domestic violence. To collect my data, I sent out an anonymous survey to every 9th through 12th grade student at my high school and listed 20 different behaviors that you would see in a relationship where domestic violence is present. I asked them whether or not the behavior was abusive or not. If the respondent believed that the behavior listed was one consistent with domestic violence, they would answer yes to the question, adding a point to their overall score. Because 20 different behaviors of domestic violence were listed, the highest possible score was 20, meaning they believed every single behavior was one consistent with domestic violence, which all 20 of them were. If any question was answered no, no point was added to their overall score. I determined that the higher the overall score, the higher the level of awareness was. To come up with the behaviors I used to measure awareness in my survey, I used the Power and Control Duluth model. a wheel that lays out behaviors and signs of domestic abuse and gives examples of how they would look in a modern relationship. I had all of the respondents list their age and previous relationship experience. My survey received 103 total responses. 34 12th graders, 22 11th graders, 27 10th graders, and 20 9th graders responded to my survey. 68 of the 103 responses were women, 26 were male, 4 were non-binary, and 5 preferred not to say. 52 respondents said that they had never been in a romantic relationship before, and 51 respondents said that they had been in a romantic relationship before. After I collected all my data, I ran a chi-square test for association to determine if there was any correlation between age and awareness level. I did the same test to see if there was any correlation between previous relationship experience and awareness level. My hypothesis was that 9th grade students would have the lowest levels of awareness, followed by 10th, then 11th, and finally 12th graders having the highest amounts of awareness. I also predicted that students who had been in a romantic relationship before would have the highest levels of awareness. To run this test, there are 3 different conditions that had to be met. The first being, my data had to come from a random sample, but because there was a voluntary response bias in my data, this means that my data did not come from a random sample. This means that my data was biased because the students had a choice on whether or not they wanted to respond to my survey. Technically, I was not supposed to continue on with the test, but because I had no other choice, I had to proceed with caution. The second condition that had to be met was 10 times my sample size had to be less than the population of the whole school, meaning that I had to multiply my 103 responses by 10, giving me 1,030. Because there are only about 900 students in the high school, which is less than 1,030, the condition is not met. Once again, technically I was not supposed to continue on with my test, but because I had no other choice, I had to proceed with caution. During a chi-squared association test, the last condition that needed to be met was my expected counts had to be at least 5. This condition was not met for my association test with age, so technically, once again, I was not supposed to continue, but I had to proceed with caution because I had no other choice. But this condition was met for my test for a previous relationship experience, so I could continue on with that test with no problem. After running the test, I determined that there is a correlation between age and awareness level, meaning that age does in fact play a role in one's awareness of behaviors of domestic violence. But I determined that there was no correlation between previous relationship experience and awareness level, meaning that previous relationship experience does not play a role in one's awareness level. Why is this important? This is important because my results determined that schools should put more resources into educating their younger students so that by the time they reach 11th and 12th grade, they are able to identify inappropriate behaviors and from there are able to stop them. This is also important because it determines that students do not need to get into a romantic relationship to learn about domestic violence. Rather, they can learn about the dangers regardless of whether or not they want to be in a relationship or not. If we start to put more energy into educating our students, the physical, sexual, emotional, economic abuse will hopefully diminish, but the only way to know for sure is if we start now. Some limitations that impacted my project are because I only sent out my survey to my high school. I didn't get a very big sample of students. 103 responses might seem like a lot, but in reality that was only about 10% of the students in my school. The second was it was very hard to come up with an ethical way to conduct my study because I wasn't able to interview students at my school personally because of privacy concerns. And if I was able to do that, I probably could have gotten a deeper understanding into why they believe what they believe. And the last being because I only sent out the survey to kids in my high school, I only got responses from a certain small demographic and I didn't get much variety in my data. There are 3 improvements that I would make to my study. The first being that the first thing I would do is make my study come from a random sample. Because my data didn't come from a random sample, I technically should not have been able to run the chi-square test for association. I would fix this by assigning random numbers to each kid in the school, and then from there I would use a random number generator to randomly select kids for my study. The second thing that I would do is send my survey out to multiple schools in the metro area so I could get responses from multiple different demographics to help me have more variety in my data. The third thing I would do is I would try to research more factors that could play a role in awareness levels. In conclusion, I determined that age does contribute to one's level of awareness of behaviors of domestic violence. It is true that the older the individual, the higher the level of awareness will be. I also determined that previous relationship experience does not contribute to one's level of awareness, so having previous relationship experience does not mean that the individual will have a higher level of awareness of behaviors of domestic abuse.
How did you determine which results generated by your method were most important in informing your new understanding?
Well, because my survey only had my two factors, age and previous relationship experience, technically all of the data that I collected was important to my study.
Okay. Another question. How did your findings provide direction for future research?
I think that it'll help provide help to future research because they'll already know that they should treat older kids differently because they probably have more levels of awareness, and that they should take into account that younger kids probably won't have higher levels of awareness.
Okay. What was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how would you apply it to future endeavors?
The most important thing that I developed was probably persistence, because with my question I encountered a lot of roadblocks that I didn't expect, but with the help of professionals and other adults around me, I was able to get past those. So I think if I ever experience any more roadblocks and things that I pursue in the future, that I'll be able to talk to those around me to attempt to get around those and not just rely on myself.